Hey, good morning, Hoosiers. Yesterday, we got through talking about this guy, Paul V. McNutt, who was our governor during the Great Depression. He ended up making government a little bit bigger and more involved in people's lives, which Indiana Hoosiers really didn't like that, but yet at the same time, they knew this was the only way out. This was their ticket out of standing in line in soup kitchens. They needed a job. They had to look towards the government. And so at this time, government was becoming much bigger under the hands of this guy. All right, so let's look at some of the things, though, that these new projects did for Indiana. Okay. They hired a whole bunch of people, but I thought this was interesting. They also hired writers in each state to write a book about the state's history and culture. Um, I said hundreds of Hoosiers worked on this book. And so this is an excellent primary source of Indiana in the 1930s. A guide to the Hoosier state. So if you're looking for something to read, boom, there you go. I like how they just basically have farming and factories. They could have put a river in there. So, yeah. All right, let's go here. They also hired and implemented what was known as the Civilian Conservation Corps. And this group of people that were hired built cabins, picnic tables, shelters, saddle barns, trails, pools at state parks. And so by 1933, Indiana had 12 state parks. So my point is as horrible as the Great Depression seemed at the time, there was so much good that came from it, especially if you're a state park person. You can thank kind of the Great Depression for it. You can see some more images there. Oops, you don't need to see my email from Chewy. I had to order dog food. All right, let's see what else coming. All right, is that it? Whoop, whoop. Yep, that's it. All right. So here we go. I'll click on that one. It says young men struggling to find jobs came from across the country to build infrastructure throughout Indiana. And of course, infrastructure is going to be your roads, bridges. In this case, it could be state parks. Some could also gain an education and receive high school diplomas if they had not yet graduated. They basically lived in camps. And we've already covered that they built roads, bridges, and park structures. All right. So 200 male workers would live in segregated accommodations. And they used the surrounding resources to build the shelters. So they would also hire artists to paint and, as it says, beautify public buildings. This one is in a post office off of Broad Ripple. It shows the atmosphere of mutual trust and friendliness, of peace and security in the essence of life in a democracy. Boom. Looks like a rather happy place to live. This one, I was kind of crazy. Just stare at that for a minute. Does anything stand out to you in this? Take it in. Take it in. Okay, please tell me that you noticed this right here. You got the KKK and a burning cross. People were very offended by this image, but he says that that wasn't the purpose of it. It was actually condemning the Klan. And if you look right here, it was celebrating change because now a white nurse was going to be caring for an African American child. And then it shows how the press played a role in the downfall of the KKK. So, very interesting. Yeah. All right, take it in, take it in. Let's move on. So then we got World War II, and it says Hoosiers on the home front. Here's a quote. It said, America became very patriotic, everyone pitching in to get the job done. So there would be no more too little and too late supplies like there had been for months. And so at this point, everyone is going to be chipping in. Factories are going to be changing. And a lot of times you see that happening right now. Factories are changing and they're producing masks, they're producing ventilators. Um, and that's the same thing that happened during World War II. Auto factories are producing military vehicles, shell casings, tanks, planes, ships. And a lot of those contracts went to South Bend, Indy, Gary, Hammond, Fort Wayne, and Evansville. And a large reason Evansville was chosen was because of the Ohio River. I'm telling you, we get a lot of good things because of our rivers. It says Chrysler hired 5,000 workers to assemble airplane wings. Navy Department created manufacturing for landing craft. So we were getting a lot of military contracts. I'm telling you, Indiana used to be it, guys. Um, Here's a crowd at Evansville gathers to celebrate a newly built landing ship and tank waiting to be launched in the Evansville shipyard in 1943. We were a big deal. Chrysler production was booming. 3 billion rounds of caliber ammunition. 96% of that was used for war. I'm telling you, 6,000 Thunderbolts were built here. Vanderburgh County received $580 million in war defense contracts. 75% of Evansville factories were involved with war production. This was huge. And look, each of those counties located by water, right? Lake Michigan to the north, Ohio River to the south. There's our Thunderbolts. And then in 1945, the war is going to be over because the bombs were going to be dropped on Japan. And after that, though, our factories were still very productive. Evansville plants were manufacturing refrigerators. I know that's a really fancy refrigerator for 1945, though. It's more like a refrigerator of today. I probably should change that picture. And then you've got 1946, a huge fire destroyed the Evansville shipyard. Calumet region, remember what they were known for? What were they producing? Steel, right? So their production went to tanks, jeeps, bombs, ammunition, and even mess kits. Mess kits are used for food. And then, of course, our farm production, they were producing 40 bushels of corn into sugars each day. So our farmers had a lot of work to do too. And then, of course, they wanted you to ration during World War II. And when you ration, you only get a certain amount. And the government tells you how much you get, by the way. So then Rosie the Riveter here wants women to get some power and go work in the factories. And so a lot of times women were taking men's jobs in the factories, but at lower pay. And then, of course, when the men came back after war and they wanted their jobs back, they're going to boot the women out. Women weren't really happy because they're like, seriously, we can work? And now you're telling us we have to go back in the house and cook and clean and iron. Ugh, I hate ironing. But here you can see the women working in the factory. They were making turbine blades for the military planes. So I'm telling you, and this was in Kokomo, but roles for women are going to change after World War II. African Americans, again, holding the lowest paying jobs, least desirable. But so 1945, you're still going to have segregation in a lot of places. And it says right here, it's a bitter pill for them to swallow. Because you have to realize that the African Americans were fighting alongside white men in World War II, being hailed as heroes, being awarded medals. But yet, when the war is over and they come back home, they're second rate. So, this was very, very difficult for the African American man to accept. And eventually, what this is going to do is it's going to that inequality, that feeling of not being appreciated is going to lead to our civil rights movement starting in the late 50s and 60s. So good, again, will eventually come out of it, but it'll take a whole lot of time. All right, we are back here with Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly was a chemist and a Civil War veteran. So this is him as a young guy, and he ends up finding a pharmaceutical company in 1876 that is still around today. Maybe if you've been driving around Indy, you've seen the Eli Lilly building with this script on the outside of it. This is him as an older guy, and he was a very modest man. He always said his existence was nothing more than being humdrum. I beg to differ that because he turned his company into a worldwide, global pharmaceutical company. And one of the big things that they did is they acquired the license to sell and produce insulin in the United States, which is huge, especially if you're diabetic. I think that's a little bit more than humdrum. Here you can see women working on the assembly line in their factories. And I thought this was pretty cool. After Pearl Harbor in 1941, they manufactured thousands of packages of blood to give to injured soldiers. And they did not earn a single profit off of that because he thought it was wrong to make a profit off of a blood donation. So, a little bit more than humdrum. Penicillin came out in 1928, but it was not mass produced until after World War II. So medically, things are advancing thanks to Indiana Hoosiers. And of course, here is where we talked about him in the first quarter of our class, how he came in and rebuilt William Connor's home. In 1934, he purchased it and then restored the house, Connor Prairie. And then I thought this was interesting. This just tells you some expenses. I don't think here it can. From 1928 to 36, what the price of certain items cost. So Indiana has definitely gone through a great change from the 1920s up into the 1940s. We're becoming a little bit more reliant on government. Socially, we are keeping up with the times. And again, Indiana is still the place to be. All right, guys, holler at me if you have a question, and I will chat with you later. See ya.